What's going on, everybody? Zack Rosenblatt here, NJ.com, with the latest episode of No Huddle Show. Sitting here at NovaCare Complex with Mike Kaye, our preview episode. I don't think we did one last week because it was a short week, and we didn't really have enough days in the week to even do it because we had that emergency Jay Ajayi one. But yeah, we're happy to have this preview back in the mix. It's a pretty big game, the Carolina Panthers on Sunday. But before we get into any of the preview and all that stuff, I think it's important to break down this injury report real quick. It's pretty extensive. They have 5 guys who were declared out. Corey Graham at safety, Sidney Jones at cornerback, Darren Sproles at hamstring again, Nathan Gary at linebacker, and DJ Alexander at linebacker. And then Haloti Ngata is questionable, which between him and Sidney Jones, those are probably the 2 most relevant ones on this list.
Well, and the Eagles have hedged their bets by bringing up Bruce Hector from the practice squad. They released Kamar Aiken earlier on Friday. So this team, I've been complaining about it for weeks. This team had 6 wide receivers and a ton of injuries on defense. They finally fill a need. Now that said, they've gone into these games, and we'll talk about this a little bit more later, but they've gone into each one of the last 2 games with just 3 defensive tackles. Now they're going into it with 3 guys. 2 of them don't have a ton of experience, but they have played a little bit in this defense. Trayvon Hester has impressed a lot of people over the last couple of weeks. Bruce Hector, who was initially cut and moved back to the practice squad because of Hester, is also a guy they like a lot. So I think this is going to be an interesting, show what you got type of game for the guys opposite Fletcher Cox, who's going to probably move around from that left to right side, and so will they, because that's how the Eagles train them. That said, though, when you talk about this injury list, a lot of people are going to say Nate Gary, DJ Alexander, that's not that big of a deal, but you're only playing 4 linebackers if you keep the roster the way it is.
Yeah, but they only play 2 linebackers most of the time anyway.
Right, but if you have an injury and then linebackers are a key part of special teams, it does add up. Not that DJ Alexander was playing on defense, but Nate Gary was their main backup for weak and middle. For weak and middle. So that's a little concerning. Sproles, we've said it before, if you can get anything out of him, awesome, terrific. Corey Graham is pretty much supplemented by the fact that they signed Dexter McDougal since our last podcast, and he'll play the nickel role. He's kind of got a similar body to and skill set to Avonte Maddox, and he knows the defense relatively well.
I am curious to see how they approach the whole defensive backfield, because they did a lot of weird shuffling. Rasul Douglas missed 2 practices this week for a personal matter, so it's not like he was able to practice more at safety. So he hasn't really had that much practice time. I know they say they cross-train, but they primarily played him at outside corner, which is something they've been adamant about. So I'm curious to see, are they going to start? I'm guessing they'll start Avonte at safety and maybe move him over to nickel occasionally and maybe still do the Douglas situation. I don't know how much they want to rely on Dexter McDougal. There's a reason why he's not on any teams right now, and there's a reason why he didn't stay on this team last year. But that's going to be one thing I'm keeping my eye on Sunday.
Yeah, I think McDougal will play on special teams, and he'll be the backup nickel.
And he'll play a little bit on nickel, I think, too. But
yeah, probably.
You shouldn't be relying on a guy you just picked up off the street that much, which is what they've done this year. It's kind of funny. I was talking about this with some reporters earlier. It's like a couple weeks ago, Avonte Maddox was only playing on special teams, and Trayvon Hester wasn't even on the roster, and then he was on practice squad, and now all of a sudden the coaches are talking about them like they have no problem with them being starting players, and that's fine. Like if you have confidence in those guys, but that just kind of says everything about where this roster is at, and that's a little concerning. That they're not going to act like the top's falling off right now, but I don't know. It's not a great sign that you're relying on guys like that, even if they have outperformed expectations.
Well, those guys that you've talked about kind of offers up a hint as to what they're going to do in the secondary. Trey Sullivan, I think this is a big game for him. Whether they move him into nickel, he played some nickel in college. Whether they have him play free safety at times when Avonte Maddox moves into nickel corner. Cross-training helps. We'll see how that works. They, to their benefit, Carolina doesn't really have burners. Torrey Smith used to be known as a burner. He's not really that fast anymore. Their nickel positions kind of been inconsistent. You're going to maybe match up against Christian McCaffrey a little bit, which is a little bit of a unique challenge for a nickel corner. Devin Funchess is a really good matchup for Jalen Mills. A really good one, because Jalen Mills can be rough with him and it won't be apparent, just because Funchess is a bigger guy. And then, they're playing Jarius Wright, who isn't that good, but he's second on the team in catches. We'll talk about matchups a little bit later on. That said, though, this probably would have been a really good game for Sidney Jones to play because of this matchup.
And they have a bunch of fast, shorter guys like
gadget dudes.
DJ Moore, Curtis Samuel, Christian McCaffrey might as well be a receiver half the time. He actually runs the ball more than he has in the past. But and
he's got a nice yards per carry average this year.
He's really good, and he's going to be one of the biggest things they have to defend. But they're going to put him out wide. They're going to split. They're going to put him in the slot. They're going to come out of the backfield. They move him all around, and that's somewhere where having Sidney Jones around would help. And maybe that's something the Panthers are going to attack, I would think.
Well, and using elementary kind of buzz terms, this team uses a lot of motion and pre-snap motion. So they'll run reverses, they'll do end arounds, they'll do RPOs, they do Camus Crozier Hill told me in the locker room the other day that it's a lot of smoke and mirror stuff. And Ronald Darby said they've got to play with a lot of eye discipline. These guys can move around, and the fact that you have the mobility of Cam Newton and the receiving ability of Christian McCaffrey makes them dangerous. Now, last year, the Eagles won 28-23 in a Thursday night football game that I thought kind of put them on the map.
That was the game that kind of catapulted the rest of their season.
Yeah, and so I think when you're looking at this matchup, it can do the same thing for them. The Giants... Terrific. You beat the Giants. Well, four other teams have beaten the Giants. So for me, I think this is the game. You know what I mean? You've been banged up. No more excuses.
And if they get a win here, you go out to London next week. The Jaguars haven't played that great recently. Then you go into a bye. I think you get a couple wins coming in here. They might run away. Maybe not run away, because the Cowboys and Redskins are hanging in there a little bit.
And they play each other this week.
But I think this could be another turning point game where we find out. I don't think it's necessarily going to make or break whether they make the playoffs, but I think this is where we find out if this team is actually a contender in the NFC or not.
Yeah, these next two games are it.
Yeah,
for me,
they can lose these next two games to still make the playoffs, but I'm not going to come out of that thinking that they're going to be a contender anymore.
Yeah, I think the only way a team wins, it makes the playoffs in this division, is by winning the division. And when you look at the schedule, if you're a betting man, you're probably saying the Rams game's a loss. You're probably saying the Saints game's a loss. So that's two games, okay? So right now they're 3-3, so that'd be 3-5. Thinking about it, you probably need 9 wins to make the playoffs. So you've got to go 6-2 the rest of the way. These two games are your big out of division games that you need to win,
especially this one being at home.
Right, and they only lost one game last year, and that was because they sat half their team after.
Yeah, the Cowboys game doesn't really count as a game. Yeah,
right. So right now they're 2-1. This Giants game needs to be their it needed to be the start of their turnaround. This is the thing.
This is them putting the key in the ignition. Now they need to start driving.
Right, because London's a really tough game, especially to travel to. Everybody wants to act like it's a normal game.
It's the time difference. It's long flight. It's a really long flight.
You're also practicing there on a Friday as opposed to in your home stadium or your home turf.
Yeah, it's unfamiliar territory. Jay Jai's not around. He can't really tell them what's going on.
Right, yeah. Oh, my gosh.
It looks like he might actually be out in London doing some sort of event. Got to capitalize on that brand,
Yeah, hey. The Titans, I think the Titans are playing in London this weekend. So for the first time in a really long time, I think the Jaguars are the last game in London. So that's kind of good. But you want to go into the bye feeling good about yourself. So if you can split these games or win both of them, you're feeling pretty good. But again, let's get into our topics.
Yeah. All right. Plot twist. Something that might happen that maybe we're not planning for, expecting for. What do you got?
Hand signals that you can't follow. Shoot.
What?
Carlos Hyde just got traded to Jacksonville.
Wow.
Oh, well, there you
That's
go.
interesting.
Ahead of the game.
Yeah, I mean, that's not good for Leonard Fournette. I mean, that impacts the Eagles game, and that takes the running back off. That's interesting. They just signed Carlos Hyde to a contract.
Yeah, huh. And he was doing really, really well, too. And he just had that baby.
And he just had that baby.
Yeah, that was like a storyline of that Thursday Night Football game. Anyway, that was via Adam Schefter.
He doesn't know what he's talking about.
Breaking some news in his...
Adam Schefter never gets it.
Yeah,
right.
Hey, well, we got to attribute it. Anyway, flipping the script, other than the Jaguars making a trade with the Browns,
we'll talk about that trade more next week, I'm sure.
I think this is Jalen Mills' best game of the year. This is going to be Jalen... You're going to, like, when they put in the Oscar tape for his year, this is going to be the one. I just have this feeling that he matches up very well against Devin Funchess. I don't think he's going to beat him deep. In the red zone, I think Mills could really bully him. Darby played his best game of the season, maybe his best game of as an Eagle against the Giants. I'm looking for Mills to kind of take that next step, shut everybody up. He played a great game against Carolina last year.
Played good against the Giants too.
Right, but he had a really good game against Carolina. He had basically a game-sealing interception in the fourth quarter.
He doesn't even have a pick yet this year. Neither of those guys do they?
Darby does.
Darby has one.
Yeah.
I mean, you want your cornerback. I mean, sometimes it's just not there, but they should have interceptions.
Well, and bringing that up, I believe only have 3 interceptions on the season. It's Rasul Douglas, it's Avonte Maddox, and then it's Ronald Darby.
So as part of your plot twist, do you think Mills gets his interception?
They have 4 because
do you think Mills gets his interception? Is that part of the plot twist for you?
I think they get 2 interceptions in this game.
And one of them is from Mr. Jalen Mills.
Jalen Mills. You're going to see some finger wagging, my friends.
And it'll be earned.
Yeah, so, again, this is a big game for the DBs. They're not having to go up against necessarily straight line speed. It's more, gadget-esque speed. They're guys that you don't want to face in open space, but they're also 2 really good open space tacklers. So I think, this will be interesting. For
me, I'm going to say this isn't like that crazy of a plot twist, but the Eagles haven't had a 100-yard rusher this season. I think this is the Corey Clement coming out game. I think this is the game that you've kind of been waiting for. I know you're huge on him, and he looked really good, and he wasn't limited, but he didn't get as many snaps as he should have last week, probably. Wendell Smallwood got most of them. I think the Panthers' run defense might be okay. Yeah, it's actually pretty good. It's in the top 5 in the league, but I don't know. I just feel like it's coming, and I think this is going to be his prove it to Howie game, and I'm not convinced they're going to trade for running back. I kind of have slowly backed away from that. I think they have more pressing needs than running back. You can fill running back easier than other positions. You can pick a guy off the street and he can help, is the reality. So I think this is the Corey Clement game. What do you think?
Oh, New Jersey, my friends. So, not to side note too much, but I realized this the other day, and I thought I was the smartest guy ever. Wendell Smallwood's from Delaware. Josh Adams is from Philly, and Corey Clement's from New Jersey. And we talked to...
The tri-state area.
Yeah, the tri-state area. We talked to Deuce Staley today, and Deuce said, those guys go out together, they hang out together, they make jokes because they know the area around, and maybe that's helped them with cohesion. I think Corey Clement has the opportunity here to really become a star. Brian Westbrook, when he first got here, was just more of a gadget guy. He was a punt returner.
Clement was undrafted, but he was a third-round pick. Right. He was still, undervalued.
Right. I mean, because you had Deuce and you had Carell Buchalter and all those guys. And he was able to kind of find his rhythm, find his music, find his gals, who could ask for anything more. There you go for you musical nuts. I just think that Corey's got an opportunity here to kind of be a little bit like McCaffrey. You can line him up. He's got great hands. He can do really great things with the ball in space. And I think this team knows that. I think Howie Roseman knows it. And that's why they haven't attacked this whole thing. If they traded for Le'Veon Bell at this point, I'd be really surprised. Corey Clement's the one guy that gives me pause. If Wendell Smallwood's my guy for 3 weeks, I'm like, no. Corey Clement has the upside to be a really good running back in this league.
It's funny you mentioned the Christian McCaffrey thing, and it's they both come from different directions. Corey Clement came to the league without any real like pass catching talent. He didn't really catch the ball at all in college. He didn't for most of his first year. And Christian McCaffrey was almost exclusively a receiver his first year. Now they kind of both like come to the middle a little bit. McCaffrey looks like a really good runner, and Corey Clement has looked like a really good pass catcher. And
Yeah,
that's why that's kind of an interesting comparison. And they've come to like McCaffrey's probably better, but they've come to a similar point like in their progression, but from different angles.
Well, and I think being good at one has helped them with the other. Now McCaffrey's only carried the ball 71 times, but he's averaging 4.9 yards per carry. That's pretty helpful, and I think part of it is teams are kind of hesitant. You know, it's like when you run the RPO, the linebacker's kind of wondering what's going to happen. I think that's kind of what's helped McCaffrey a little bit in the running game, especially with Cam there, and you never know what's going to happen. I think they can do the same thing with Carson and Corey.
All right, match game. The matchups we're looking at. Oh, there was one that Doug Peterson kind of brought up today that I found kind of interesting. It's the battle of the minds between Jason Kelce and Luke Kuechly. Because I think Jason Kelce talked about it in the locker room. It's just those are the guys calling the plays. They're kind of playing off each other. They've gone against each other a few times over the course of their careers, and I think who gets the better of that, who outsmarts the other one, the one that if Jason Kelce calls out their blitzes and figures it out, if Luke Kuechly surprises them, like I just think that's a very interesting matchup to watch. They're not necessarily going to go head to head, but like that battle of the minds, I think that's an interesting perspective.
Yeah, and I think Carson Wentz plays into that as well.
Yeah,
he's got to be able to identify the Mike linebacker. He's got to be able to identify the blitzes, and Luke's as smart as they come. So it's going to be an interesting matchup to say the least. Now, my matchup that I'm really looking forward to is Alshon Jeffrey versus James Bradbury.
Yeah, I was going to bring that one
So
up.
I asked Ron Rivera about that. He's 6'1", over 200 pounds. Bradbury is. He's a bigger corner. I think that plays into helping the Panthers because if you look at the guys that Alshon's torched or jumped over, you got Malcolm Butler, who's sub 6 foot. You've got guys that are not necessarily big dudes. He struggled a little bit against the Vikings, who have Xavier Rhodes, who have guys that can make plays on bigger corners. So I think it's just one of those things where this team needs to be able to rely on its other wide receivers if he does get, held up a little bit.
Yeah, and I think the most important matchup in reality, we've talked about McCaffrey quite a bit, but it's how the defense handles Cam Newton. Because as we've seen, he's not always the most accurate passer, but he just makes he's a force. He's a freak. He can make plays with his legs, and the way or how well the Eagles contain him is kind of going to decide if they win this game, most likely.
Sure. Yeah, I agree completely.
Yeah, I don't think we need to belabor that. It's not something everybody's thought. Do you have any hot takes about this game, about this week, about what's coming? Here, I'll throw one out. It has less to do with this game, and it might not be the hottest of takes, but I think it is a take. I wouldn't be surprised if we go through the trade deadline and the Eagles don't even make a trade.
Okay. Yeah, I mean, I could see it. I think they like the guys that they have.
I think a lot of it has to do with them being confident in the guys that are injured coming back. It sounds like one or both of Mac Hollins and Mike Wallace will come back. Maybe Richard Rodgers. That's not as important. But, I mean, if Tim Jernigan comes back, that's kind of like a trade acquisition. I think that's the big one.
That's the key.
I'm not sure. I'm still not confident he's going to, number one, return, and number two, make a huge impact. But if they believe he will, then, it doesn't really make much sense to go and trade for a defensive tackle.
Yeah, if he comes back by, the bye week or, maybe mid-November, that's huge. That guy is so much more talented than the guys.
Yeah, even if he's inconsistent, his inconsistency is still probably better than. No disrespect to Hester and Hector, but they're not ready yet for that.
I think they have a guy in Hester.
I think.
Really impressed
but you still shouldn't be relying on him as your number two defensive tackle.
But what's good about that?
And then it allows you to rotate Haloti Ngata more. It allows you to rotate Hester in. Jernigan doesn't need to play 60 snaps. He can play 30 snaps.
I mean, and that's the benefit of Jim Schwartz's system and everything like that. That's why I think Barnett ended up playing so well as he was getting rotated in. He didn't have to be the guy. The only position I really think you would need to make a trade in is in the secondary. I believe in these running backs for the most part.
I think safety is the number one need. Defensive tackle's up there, but I think safety is number one.
And I think Avonte Maddox is going to be fine at free safety. I really would like to see
but not yet.
I would really like to see them trade for a nickel corner. I know that sounds such a weird.
Well, if they do that, then they're able to like move everybody around because then they have all these guys who can play different positions.
Right. Then you have options. You can say Sidney Jones is the backup.
You can go back to rotating Jenkins like they like to do. I don't think he's been able to as much the last couple of games. I don't think he's been as effective as normal.
You need a hybrid player.
So if they have a bunch of guys who can play a bunch of like that's what Jim Schwartz that's his dream.
The guy for me.
He just makes so much sense. The Raiders don't play him like he won't give a conditional 6th-round pick. Like
he's a young guy you can feel good about.
If he's not good, then you cut ties with him after the year. If he's good, then he can be on this team for the long haul.
Well, and here's the thing too: is Avonte Maddox has played well enough at free safety that you feel really good about him starting at nickel, and then that moves Sidney Jones back to being a backup on the outside.
I mean, even if this means Carl Joseph only plays safety when they move Avonte into the nickel, like even if they just have someone who
they can a third guy.
Yeah, they just need that guy because even when Corey Graham comes back, he's still probably better suited as like guy who can play a couple positions and play like 20 to 30 snaps a game, but he's 33 and we saw he's kind of past what he can do for this team.
Right, and not to have too much foresight, but this team wants to contend for a while, and so they're going to need parts that aren't just like the loads of draft prospects that they're going to bring in next year. You know what I mean? So you want to be able to see guys like Trayvon Hester develop. You want to see Bruce Hector develop so you can maybe move on from Timmy Jernigan's contract. You want to see guys like you maybe want to add a guy who has 1 or 2 years left on his deal at wide receiver or safety, because then you can look the other way from Mike Wallace. You can look the other way from a guy like Corey Graham. That's part of the reason why they traded for Ajayi is because they knew they probably weren't going to have LeGarrette Blount next year or this year. So that's something to consider.
By the way, just speaking of trades, the compensation for that Carlos Hyde trade, 5th-round pick, I think that is probably helps the Eagles, if anything, because if they're looking to trade for running back, he's a guy on a 3-year deal. He's still fairly young. He was productive for the Browns.
Yeah, the Browns
if that's the most the Browns can get for that guy from a team that needs a running back in the Jaguars, like the Eagles should be able to get, like Carlos Hyde would be the Eagles' best running back if they traded for him. Like,
right.
If they can get a guy at that level for a 5th-round pick, they should do it.
And to that point, Dave Codwell just made a really smart trade for the Jaguars, because even if, let's say Fournette doesn't play in London, okay, cool, so you're playing Hyde, he fits the system, they like to run that hard-nosed, straight-line running back stuff, north to south.
Northeast west.
Yeah, north to south. But he's going to complement, that's what I'm talking about, planning for the future, he's going to complement Leonard Fournette, and on top of that...
And he's under contract.
Right, and on top of that, when they lose TJ Yeldon, because TJ Yeldon's going to make all this money this year, probably... I'll be banging the drum for him to come to Philly because he makes a ton of sense in a rotation with Corey Clement and Wendell Smallwood.
Yeah.
Even though he's terrible his first 3 years.
It takes guys. It takes some guys time.
He's one of the best.
He's having a really good year for them.
Well, and he's one of the best blitz pickup guys in the league.
What the Eagles need that right now.
Right.
Hey, what if the Jaguars want to give him up now?
Hey, maybe that would make sense. And then on top of that, you have this guy under contract, and if Leonard Fournette isn't good to go for the next couple of years. There you go. You've got your two-headed monster.
Which is the kind of move that, like, Howie doesn't need to be trading for a guy like LaShawn McCoy. He should be trading for a guy like Carlos Hyde, in my opinion. But anyway, we'll stop talking about the trade deadline, which comes October 30th, actually. But, all right, let's see. And then, let's jump into the score. What do you think? Who wins? Why? What's the score? What do you got?
I've got the Eagles winning, I believe, 31-24. I think this is a touchdown game. If they're going to really have that breakout game, this needs to be it.
Yeah, I forget what I put down for the prediction. I do think the Eagles win this game. I think it's going to be a good one. Like I said, it'll come down to how they stop Cam Newton. I think I had 28-24. But, yeah, I just really... This is going to be the game that kind of just jumpstarts their season. I don't know. What else you got?
For me, it's one of those things where this game could mean a lot more than they're kind of placating to. Like this has been a really chill week. You notice that?
Yeah. It's funny how just one win changes everything. Everybody's freaking out last week.
Everybody's in the locker room. Everybody wants to talk.
Right, so how about this? Give me 3 guys that you think that we're not really talking about that need to have a good game on Sunday.
Isaac Seumalo is a guy that I thought played really well against the Giants. If he can continue to do that, especially in the running game, I think this team made the right choice at left guard. Another guy that I think's played really well is Camus. I think, he's a 2-down linebacker, but he showed his football smarts in that game against the Giants. And then, Avonte Maddox, we keep talking about him. They've been praising the crap out of him. He's a guy that has to have a good game here. He can be a turnover machine. He's got good ball skills. He knows what he's doing back there now. He's had time to adjust. This team needs to count on these young guys. If Avonte Maddox is a starting free safety next year and they have to move on from McLeod's contract, that's what I keep preaching. It's not just about win now, it's about win for the next 3 years, because that's the window. Because if Carson doesn't get his extension next year, you still have room to work. If he doesn't get his extension the next year, you have
I'm guessing they sign him pretty early.
I am too, but I'm just saying you have these options, and I think you're getting rid of Nick Foles. Excuse me.
Dying over there.
Yeah, I don't know what it is. You're getting rid of Nick Foles probably after this year. Jason Peters is probably going to retire. Darren Sproles. You're getting rid of some of these contracts, and you need to supplement these big contracts that you currently have with these young guys with young dudes that are on rookie contracts, undrafted contracts. Like, I look at their practice squad, they have a lot of potential at wide receiver. Doran Miller can play. I watched him in Jacksonville. He was terrific. As a deep threat, you've got Braxton Miller, who could maybe be a gadget guy. He's a guy that probably, I don't know this for a fact, but if I was them in practice, he probably played the Christian McCaffrey role on scout team. That would have made sense. DeAndre Carter's developing as a punt returner. Like, there's a lot of good to take away from a lot of guys having to step in, and I think that kind of gets lost in the shuffle. But you look at how much Wendell Smallwood's improved. You look at how much Corey Clement's improved. Josh Adams now has experience. At tight end, Josh Perkins has proven to give you something. Dallas Goedert's become a really good blocker. You're looking at, on defense, Trevon Hester could be a guy. Bruce Hector could be a guy. Josh Sweat looked pretty good against the Giants. At linebacker, that's kind of a spot where you never have enough depth, but I think...
I don't know how much they value linebacker position anyway.
Most don't.
Yeah. They didn't under Andy Reid back in the day either,
right.
actually.
That was like a Bill Polian, Andy Reid sort of thing. They're not from the same tree, but those were two guys that really just didn't put a lot of value in the linebacker position. Same with Jim Johnson. I mean, Jim Johnson used linebackers well, but he felt like they were part of the system.
Think about who was really that great from that era besides
Jeremiah Trotter.
That's what I was about to say. Besides Jeremiah Trotter, like there were some guys they would shuffle. They would shuffle guys like Dhani Jones, like
Ike Reese. Ike Reese was actually pretty. Okay.
Those were all solid like role guys who they kind of
right.
They were interchangeable. Like they could put anybody there.
They were. I
mean, I guess if you can do that and still have dominant defense, then
you
that's
didn't have a Seth Joyner.
You just need someone who can do their job.
Right. Yeah.
And Trotter kind of faded fairly quickly. I mean, he had a nice, really good prime, but
when he went to Washington, it ruined him.
Yeah,
like most franchises. There are most people that go
most people. Yeah.
At DB, Trey Sullivan was a guy that didn't look that great on special teams during the preseason, but maybe he develops on defense, and he's a guy that can be a quote role player. Maybe he can take that Chris Maragos job. They're preparing for. They have to be looking at the future. It's the day-to-day and the big picture. And day-to-day, it's kind of frustrating, but there are guys that are developing for the big picture. And I think, as an Eagles fan, you should feel good about that.
And they're on track, depending on compensatory picks and stuff, to have like 12 picks. This might be their most important draft they've had in the last 5 years. Besides the Carson Wentz draft, because it's Carson Wentz. But they have a lot of spots they're going to have to fill. And maybe that's why they're a little hesitant to make trades, because they want to get guys on rookie deals instead of guys on expiring contracts.
Right, and the reason why it's good that all these guys are developing is they've already got experience. You're not just relying on rookies next year.
Yeah, so the rookies can be eased in. And
right.
Yeah.
I think Josh Sweat's a guy that could replace Brandon Graham down the road, I think.
I mean, he's getting the injuries. I mean, the positive you can take away from all these guys getting hurt is that guys are getting thrown into the fire too soon. I mean, this happens all. I covered Arizona football. They had a really bad year where they had to play like all their freshmen, and by the next year, all those guys are ready to go. They already went through all their freshman woes. Like it really helps these guys that go out there, to fail, get their failures out now when they're not expected to do much. And then when Josh Sweat comes back next year as a good offseason, I wouldn't be surprised if he maybe doesn't start, but he gets like Chris Long role next year if Chris Long retires. Like, would that surprise you? No.
No, not at all. I think Barnett's like the key to like the youth movement. Like if Barnett can develop into an 8 to 10,
they're banking on him.
Well, and they should.
And
right?
that's part of why I think they haven't re-signed Brandon Graham yet, if they're going to at all.
Like I'll tell you, just from like a draft perspective, I think Barnett is the most fitting defensive first-round pick that they've had outside of Fletcher Cox in the last 10 years. Like, it made sense why you did that.
The funny thing is, today, Doug kind of alluded to this, and, there's a lot of buzz around Christian McCaffrey going to the Eagles before the draft. He just made a lot of sense for what they needed. They wound up with Barnett. McCaffrey was number 8, but just the way Doug talked today, he kind of talked like if he had fallen to the Eagles, they might have picked him at number 13, 14. It's kind of interesting to think like how much different that draft would look because they overdrafted Donnell Pumphrey in the 4th round. They wouldn't have had to do that anymore. Like, do they pick a defensive end in the 2nd round? Like, it's one of those what ifs.
Yeah,
how fun would Christian McCaffrey be on this offense, though?
He would have. He would have been.
I mean, Barnett's going to be a Pro Bowler probably, but that is a fun what if.
I value pass rushers.
Of course, you shouldn't draft running backs early, but there's unique guys. I mean, we're not going to get into the Saquon Barkley thing, but yeah, and one more guy we haven't really talked about today, but we talked about him earlier in the week when we didn't know if he would play this week is Jason Peters. I think I'm going to be very curious to see how he looks because he already, before this biceps injury, which on top of his quad thing, which it wasn't on the injury report, but they kind of implied that it was going to bother him all season, and maybe they're just kind of focusing on one injury on the injury report or something. I don't know, but he hasn't looked that good, and he's battling injuries. They probably should have rested him a week or two, I think, but
I agree.
Maybe Peters won't let them. Like he has that kind of
I think
power around here.
This is going to be that.
And part of it also might be that Lane Johnson is banged up, and they have Vitae as their swing tackle to play left or right tackle. So if both of those guys get injured, I don't know. But I think how Jason Peters plays is going to be something I have my eye on.
Yeah, he's a guy that I think this is going to be his last hurrah, and he wants to end on a positive note. Whether it'll end on a positive note or not, I think he's overseeing Big B out there. You know what I mean? Like I think he wants to kind of ride off in the sunset on his own terms, and we'll see. I mean, maybe they'll give him help. It's gonna be interesting.
I mean, it's interesting for a 36-year-old to go from probably being out 1 to 2 weeks to fully practicing by midweek. But I mean, he has been a freak of nature for most of his career. So I mean, it wouldn't surprise me if all of a sudden we started seeing a Jason Peters that we all used to know. But I just don't see it. All right, we can end on that note, on that negative note, after being positive for a lot of the podcast. As always, make sure you subscribe if you don't already. We're on iHeartRadio, YouTube, Spreaker, Apple Podcast, Google Play, Spotify, SoundCloud. You guys got to start sending us some questions. We want some questions, and we'll answer them on the air. Write us a review, and thanks for listening.